The chamber is sealed. The air inside has not moved in 3,245 years. Outside, in the Valley of the Kings, November heat shimmers over limestone cliffs. Howard Carter's hands tremble as he enlarges the hole in the doorway. Lord Carnarvon stands behind him in the darkness, waiting. Carter inserts a candle through the opening. The flame flickers. For a moment, there is only silence. "Can you see anything?" Carnarvon asks. Carter's voice, when it comes, is barely a whisper. Yes, wonderful things. What he sees through that hole will captivate the world. Gold everywhere, the glint of a throne, statues standing sentinel, a chariot, the sealed doorway to an inner chamber. All of it untouched, all of it waiting. The tomb of a boy king who ruled Egypt for 9 years and died at 19. A minor pharaoh forgotten by history, whose name had been deliberately erased from the records by those who came after him. But here is what Carter does not see in that moment. He does not see the 3,000 years of civilization that made this burial possible. He does not see the unbroken chain of kings and queens, priests and builders, scribes and farmers who maintained the same beliefs, the same rituals, the same essential understanding of the cosmos for longer than any civilization before or since. He does not see the river that made it all possible, or the deserts that protected it, or the theology that justified it, or the bureaucracy that sustained it. He sees wonderful things. We are about to understand why they existed at all. Before we continue, I want to ask you for something. If you're finding this exploration valuable, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support is what makes these deep investigations possible. And I'm genuinely curious, where in the world are you watching from today? Are you in Egypt itself, standing in the shadow of these monuments? Somewhere else in Africa? Europe? The Americas? Asia? Drop a comment and let me know. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now, let us go back to the beginning, not to Tutankhamun. Further, much further. 5,000 years before Christ, the Nile River Valley is a green corridor cutting through endless desert. Small villages cling to the riverbanks. Every summer the river rises, water spreads across the floodplain, depositing rich black soil. When the waters recede, farmers plant barley and emmer wheat in the fertile mud. The harvest is reliable, the population grows. Imagine standing on the bank of this ancient Nile. The sun beats down with an intensity that makes the air shimmer. But here, beside the river, there is life. Papyrus reeds sway in the breeze, their umbrella-like tops rustling. Ibises wade through the shallows, their curved beaks probing for fish. Crocodiles bask on mudbanks, ancient and patient. Hippopotami wallow in deeper pools, deceptively placid until disturbed. The water itself is the color of clay during the flood season, thick with sediment from the highlands of Ethiopia, where the Blue Nile originates, and from the Great Lakes of Central Africa, where the White Nile begins. This sediment is not waste. This sediment is wealth. Each particle of silt carries nutrients. When the waters spread across the floodplain and then retreat, they leave behind a layer of soil so rich that farmers need no fertilizer, no complex crop rotation, no period of leaving fields fallow. The early farmers learned to read the river's moods. They watch for the star Sirius, which rises in the sky just before the flood begins. They mark the high water levels on rocks and record them. They notice patterns. In years when the flood is too low, famine follows. In years when it is too high, villages are destroyed. But most years, the flood is just right, predictable, manageable, a gift. This predictability changes everything. In Mesopotamia, between the Tigris and Euphrates, floods come without warning and often bring destruction. Farmers there must constantly negotiate with chaos. But here on the Nile, farmers can plan, they can anticipate, they can build calendars and organize labor and accumulate surplus. Surplus is the foundation of civilization. When you grow more food than you need to survive, you can support people who do not farm. Potters who make better vessels for storing grain. Weavers who make better cloth. Toolmakers who fashion better plows and sickles. Priests who mediate between the people and the mysterious forces that make the flood come each year. And gradually, inevitably, the villages grow into towns. The towns develop hierarchies. Some families accumulate more wealth. Some individuals display more skill. Leaders emerge, people who can organize communal projects like irrigation canals and defensive walls. The settlements specialize. This town becomes known for its pottery, that town for its flint tools. Trade networks develop along the river. But here is what makes this river different from others. The Tigris and Euphrates in Mesopotamia flood unpredictably, violently, destroying as often as they nourish. The Nile floods with remarkable consistency. July through October, every single year. You can plan around it, you can build a calendar around it, you can build a civilization around it. The Nile flows northward, unusual in itself, for over 4,000 miles from its sources to the Mediterranean. Along most of that journey, it is a broad, gentle river. But at several points, granite outcroppings create rapids and waterfalls. These cataracts, as they are called, form natural boundaries. The first cataract near modern Aswan becomes the traditional southern border of Egypt proper. Beyond it lies Nubia, a different world of different peoples. By 3,500 years before Christ, two distinct regions have emerged along the navigable length of the Nile. Upper Egypt in the south, where the Nile runs through a narrow valley between cliffs. Lower Egypt in the north, where the river spreads into a wide delta before meeting the Mediterranean. They are separate kingdoms, different crowns, different patron gods, different burial customs. Upper Egypt is a strip of green never more than a few miles wide, hemmed in by desert cliffs of limestone and sandstone. The sky there is intensely blue, cloudless for most of the year. The light is sharp and clear. The landscape has a stark beauty, the vivid green of the valley floor contrasting with the pale yellow and red of the cliffs and the deeper ochre of the desert beyond. Villages cluster tightly along the riverbank. Fields stretch in narrow bands. Beyond the fields, the desert begins abruptly. You can stand with 1 foot in irrigated soil and 1 foot in sand. This geography creates a particular mindset. The Egyptians of Upper Egypt see the world as sharply divided. The black land, Kemet, is the fertile soil deposited by the Nile, the land of life and order. The red land, Deshret, is the desert, the land of death and chaos. These are not just descriptive terms, they are cosmological categories. Everything good comes from Kemet. Everything dangerous comes from Deshret. Yet the desert is not entirely hostile. It provides copper and gold and semi-precious stones. It offers routes for trade caravans. It serves as a vast graveyard where the dry air preserves bodies naturally, which will later inspire the practice of mummification. And most importantly, it protects. Any army wishing to invade Upper Egypt must either sail up the river, where they can be seen for miles and defensive positions prepared, or cross hundreds of miles of waterless desert, which is nearly impossible for large forces. Upper Egypt wears the white crown, the hedjet, a tall conical crown that resembles a bowling pin. Its capital is Hierakonpolis, city of the hawk. Its god is Horus, the falcon, whose eyes are the sun and moon, who flies above the world and sees everything. The rulers of Upper Egypt emphasize strength, direct action, the clarity of the falcon's strike. Lower Egypt is a different world. The delta spreads across thousands of square miles, a maze of river channels and marshes and islands. The landscape is green and lush and complicated. Fish and waterfowl are abundant. The Mediterranean coast brings different influences, different trade connections, different threats and opportunities. Lower Egypt wears the red crown, the deshret, confusingly sharing a name with the word for desert, but shaped like a flat-topped cap with a tall projection in the back and a spiral rising from the front. Its capital is Buto, a delta city whose exact location has been lost to the shifting geography of the region. Its god is Wadjet, the cobra goddess, protective and deadly, associated with the papyrus marshes of the delta. These two lands share a language, or closely related dialects. They share fundamental religious concepts. They trade extensively with each other. Upper Egypt has gold and stone. Lower Egypt has access to Mediterranean trade and abundant fish and waterfowl, but they are politically separate, and they understand themselves as separate peoples. They also fight, conflicts over trade rights, disputes over territory at the boundary between Upper and Lower Egypt, competition for prestige. The archaeological record shows fortifications, weapons, evidence of warfare, but they also intermarry among their elites. They share artistic motifs. They are drawn together even as they remain apart. The river connects them. Boats can sail from the delta to the first cataract in a matter of weeks. Northbound travel is easy. You drift with the current. Southbound travel is almost as easy. You raise a sail and let the wind, which blows predominantly from the north, push you upstream. The Egyptians will eventually use the same hieroglyph for to travel north and to sail downstream, and a different hieroglyph for to travel south and to sail upstream. The river is the road. The river is the highway. The river is the nervous system of the civilization. Around 3,100 years before Christ, a king whose name is either Nama or Menes, we are not entirely certain if these are the same person, or two different rulers whose reigns have blurred together in memory, unifies the two lands. We know this happened because we have a carved palette showing a king wearing both crowns, striking down enemies from both regions. The Nama palette, one of the earliest historical documents Egypt will leave us. The palette is a ceremonial object made of siltstone, carefully carved on both sides. On one side, a king wears the white crown of Upper Egypt and raises a mace above his head, preparing to strike a kneeling captive. An attendant behind him carries his sandals, indicating that the king walks barefoot on this sacred ground. Before him, a falcon, Horus, perches on a cluster of papyrus plants, the symbol of Lower Egypt, and holds a rope attached to a man's head emerging from the plants. The symbolism is clear. Horus, patron of the king, has captured Lower Egypt. On the reverse side, the same king now wears the red crown of Lower Egypt and inspects rows of decapitated enemies. In the center, two long-necked felines are intertwined, their necks forming a circle, a symbol of unity. Below, a bull, representing the king's strength, breaks through the walls of a city. This is propaganda. This is political art. This is a ruler declaring that he has accomplished what seemed impossible, bringing the two lands together under one crown. Whether it happened through military conquest or political marriage or gradual consolidation, we cannot be certain. But the result is clear. Memphis is founded at the junction point between Upper and Lower Egypt, at the apex of the delta where the river begins to split into its many branches. The location is strategic. Whoever controls Memphis controls the flow of goods and people between north and south. The city will remain important for thousands of years. The double crown is created. the white crown of Upper Egypt inserted into the red crown of Lower Egypt, the Shent, the symbol of unified rule. Egypt as a political entity begins. And here is the remarkable thing. Here is what will distinguish Egypt from every other civilization in human history. Once unified, Egypt will remain essentially Egyptian for the next 3,000 years. 3,000 years. Think about that span. When Egypt unified, writing had just been invented. Wheels were barely in use. Bronze was a new technology. When Egypt ended as an independent civilization, Rome ruled the Mediterranean. Greece had produced Plato and Aristotle. The great library of Alexandria existed. Iron weapons were commonplace, and the classical world was in full flower. Egypt predated Babylon and outlasted it. Egypt predated classical Greece by 2,000 years. Egypt was ancient when ancient Greece was young. Tourists from the Roman Empire visited Egyptian monuments that were already more ancient to them than Roman ruins are to us today. When a wealthy Roman visited the pyramids of Giza in the 1st century AD, those pyramids were already 2,600 years old. To that Roman, the pyramids were more ancient than the Colosseum is to us. The hieroglyphs were already indecipherable. The names of the builders were lost to legend. The Egyptians the Romans encountered could no more explain how the pyramids were built than we can. The knowledge had already been lost for over 1,000 years. How does a civilization last that long? What makes continuity possible on that scale? The answer begins with geography. Look at Egypt on a map. The Nile Valley is a narrow ribbon of green cutting through desert. To the east, the Arabian Desert. To the west, the Sahara. To the north, the Mediterranean Sea. To the south, the cataracts, rocky rapids that make navigation difficult and invasion nearly impossible. Egypt is a fortress by accident of geography. Invaders must cross vast deserts or sail up a river where defenders can see them coming. There are no broad plains for horse armies to sweep across, no mountain passes providing secret routes, just desert, river, and more desert. This isolation has consequences. Other civilizations in Mesopotamia are constantly invaded, constantly absorbing new peoples and new ideas by force. Egypt develops in relative peace. When threats do come, they come slowly enough that Egypt can respond. The isolation creates stability. The stability creates continuity. But geography alone is not enough. Plenty of civilizations have had defensive geography and still collapsed from within. Egypt has something else. Egypt has the Nile, and the Nile has a rhythm. Every year the flood comes, the water rises, the black soil is deposited, the water recedes, planting happens, growth happens, harvest happens, dry season happens. The cycle repeats. It is so reliable that the Egyptians build their entire calendar around it. 3 seasons: Akhet, the inundation; Peret, the growing season; Shemu, the harvest. During Akhet, from July to October, the river swells. Water spreads across the floodplain, transforming the landscape into a vast, shallow lake with villages and towns rising like islands. This is a time of relative leisure for farmers. Fields are underwater. Planting is impossible. Instead, this is when the pharaoh calls up labor for public projects: pyramid building, temple construction, canal digging. The flood season becomes the building season. During Peret, from November to February, the waters recede. The fields emerge, covered in a fresh layer of nutrient-rich silt. Farmers plough the soft earth, often using simple wooden ploughs pulled by cattle, and broadcast seed. The Egyptian climate provides the rest. Rainfall is minimal, but irrigation channels capture and distribute water from the river. Crops grow in the mild winter temperatures. During Shemu, from March to June, the harvest comes. Barley ripens first, then emmer wheat. Farmers cut the grain with sickles, thresh it on circular threshing floors where cattle trample the stalks, winnow it by tossing it in the air so the wind carries away the chaff. The grain is measured by official scribes who calculate the tax owed to the pharaoh and the temples. What remains feeds the farming family for the year ahead. Then the cycle begins again. The Nile rises, Akhet returns, the pattern repeats. The flood deposits between 4 and 10 million tons of sediment every year. This is not a metaphor, this is not poetic exaggeration. Millions of tons of rich soil delivered annually, turning the Nile Valley into the most productive agricultural land in the ancient world. Egypt feeds itself. Egypt feeds itself so well that it can support a massive population that does not farm. Priests, scribes, artisans, soldiers, builders, the specialists who will create the civilization. But the flood must be managed. Irrigation channels must be dug, canals must be maintained, disputes over water must be resolved. This requires organization. This requires hierarchy. This requires a central authority powerful enough to coordinate the labor of millions. Enter the pharaoh. The pharaoh is not just a king. Kings exist elsewhere. The pharaoh is something more. The pharaoh is divine. The pharaoh is Horus, incarnate while living, and becomes Osiris when dead. The pharaoh is the son of Ra, the sun god. The pharaoh is the intermediary between the human world and the cosmic order. Think about what this means. In Mesopotamia, kings are mighty, but they are still men. They rule with the gods' favor, but they are not themselves gods. If a king rules poorly, the gods might withdraw their support and the people have a right to rebel. But in Egypt, the pharaoh is a god. To rebel against the pharaoh is to rebel against the divine order itself. It is not just political treason, it is cosmic heresy. The Egyptians have a word for this cosmic order: Ma'at, truth, justice, balance, harmony. The natural state of the universe when everything is as it should be. Ma'at is represented as a goddess, a woman with an ostrich feather on her head, but Ma'at is also a principle, a force, the underlying structure of reality. When Ma'at prevails, the Nile floods at the right level, the crops grow, the sun rises and sets, the stars follow their proper courses, society functions harmoniously. The strong protect the weak. Justice is done. Truth is spoken, everything is in balance. When Ma'at is violated, chaos comes, Isfet, disorder. The flood fails. Drought strikes, enemies invade, disease spreads, society fractures. Truth becomes lies. Justice becomes oppression. The world tilts toward destruction. The pharaoh's job is to maintain Ma'at. When the pharaoh rules properly, when he performs the correct rituals, when he builds temples for the gods, when he ensures justice in his kingdom, Ma'at is maintained and Egypt prospers. The pharaoh is not arbitrary. He is bound by Ma'at just as everyone else is, but he is uniquely capable of maintaining it because of his divine nature. This is not just theology. This is the fundamental political structure of Egypt. The pharaoh's divine status is what justifies centralized control of the river. The pharaoh's role as maintainer of Ma'at is what explains why everyone must cooperate with royal authority. You do not rebel against the pharaoh any more than you rebel against the rising of the sun. Both are part of the natural order, and for a remarkably long time it works. The Old Kingdom begins around 2700 years before Christ. This is the age of pyramid building. This is when Egypt becomes Egypt in the sense that later ages will remember. Pharaoh Djoser rules in the 27th century. His architect is a man named Imhotep. Imhotep is the first architect whose name we know in all of human history. He is also a priest, a physician, an astronomer, a sage. Later generations will revere him so greatly that he will be deified, worshipped as a god of wisdom and healing. Imhotep designs something unprecedented, a pyramid, not a smooth-sided pyramid like those that will come later. A step pyramid, 6 layers, stacked progressively smaller, rising above the desert at Saqqara, near Memphis. To understand how radical this is, consider what came before. The elite of pre-dynastic Egypt were buried in mastabas, rectangular, flat-roofed structures made of mud brick. The word mastaba comes from Arabic and means bench, which describes their shape. They were impressive enough, some of them quite large, but they were fundamentally just rectangular boxes covering underground burial chambers. Imhotep takes the mastaba concept and transforms it. He begins with a stone mastaba, already innovative, since stone is much more difficult to work than mud brick, but vastly more durable. Then he stacks a smaller mastaba on top, then another, smaller still, and another, 6 levels in total, creating a structure that rises in steps toward the sky. The symbolism is multi-layered. The pyramid is a stairway for the pharaoh's spirit to ascend to the heavens. It is a physical manifestation of the primordial mound that emerged from the waters of chaos at the creation of the world. It is a mountain of permanence in a land where stone is rare and precious. The step pyramid complex at Saqqara is not just a tomb. It is an entire ceremonial city for the dead pharaoh. A wall encloses 40 acres, within it courtyards, chapels, shrines, temples, administrative buildings, all carved from stone, all designed for the pharaoh's use in the afterlife. Some of the buildings are not functional. They are stone representations of buildings that would have been made from wood and reeds in life. Their doors do not open. They are facades, architectural sculptures, meant to be seen but not used, except in the afterlife. The assumption is that Joseph's spirit will inhabit this complex forever, performing rituals, receiving offerings, existing in stone eternity. This is the first time human beings have built a structure on this scale from stone. Previous monuments were made of mud brick. Mud brick erodes, stone endures. Imhotep is making a statement about permanence, about eternity, about defeating time itself. The step pyramid is a success. Imhotep's name is carved in stone alongside his pharaohs, an honor almost never given to non-royal persons. He will later be deified. He will become the god of wisdom and medicine. But the pyramid he built is only the beginning. Later, pharaohs will refine the design. The step pyramid will smooth into the true pyramid form. The bent pyramid at Dashur, built by Pharaoh Sneferu, starts at a steep angle, but then changes to a shallower slope halfway up, probably because the original angle was structurally unstable. Sneferu learns from this mistake and builds the Red Pyramid, Egypt's first successful true pyramid with smooth sides from base to apex. Then Sneferu's son takes the throne, Khufu. He will build the greatest pyramid of all. Pharaoh Khufu, the Greeks will call him Cheops, comes to power around 2,600 years before Christ. He decides to build something bigger, much bigger, the Great Pyramid of Giza, 2.3 million stone blocks. Each block weighs an average of 2.5 tons. Some blocks, particularly those in the ceiling of the king's chamber, weigh as much as 80 tons. The pyramid will rise to a height of 146 meters. It will remain the tallest human-made structure on Earth for 3,800 years. Nothing humans build will surpass it in height until the Lincoln Cathedral in England in the 14th century. Stand at the base of the Great Pyramid, look up. The scale defeats comprehension. You know the dimensions intellectually, but standing there, you feel them physically. The mass, the weight, the sheer improbability of it. Each stone was cut, moved, lifted, positioned, millions of them, with copper tools and rope and human muscle and organizational genius. The pyramid is not a pile of rocks. It is an engineered structure of extraordinary precision. The base is leveled to within 2 centimeters across a length of 230 meters. The 4 sides are aligned to the cardinal directions with an accuracy of less than 4 minutes of arc. The angles are exact. The interior chambers and passageways are precisely cut through solid rock and precisely positioned within the massive superstructure. How do you build something like this? We do not know. Not completely. We have theories, we have partial evidence, but no contemporary Egyptian text describes the construction process. The pyramids simply appear in the record, already built, already mysterious. What we do know is this. The workers were not slaves. We found their village at Giza. We found the bakeries that fed them, enormous bakeries, capable of producing thousands of loaves daily. We found the brewery that produced their beer ration. Beer was safer to drink than water and also provided calories and nutrition. We found the cemetery where injured workers were buried with medical care evident in their bones, broken bones that were set and healed, amputations that were survived, dental work, evidence of surgical intervention. We found graffiti left by work gangs boasting about their contributions. The followers of the powerful White Crown of Khufu and the drunkards of Menkora are 2 actual work gang names that survive, written in red ochre on stone blocks. These men had pride in their work. They were organized into competing teams that challenged each other. This was not the labor of the oppressed. This was the labor of citizens participating in a national project. These were paid laborers, farmers who worked on the pyramid during the flood season when their fields were underwater and there was no agricultural work to be done. It was a form of taxation, labor tax, but also a form of employment and social organization. The pyramid was a jobs program, a national project, a way of transforming agricultural surplus into monumental permanence. The stones were quarried locally mostly. Limestone from nearby quarries cut with copper tools and wooden wedges. Workers would cut channels around a block, then drive wooden wedges into cracks. Wetting the wedges would make them expand, splitting the stone. Copper saws, perhaps used with quartz sand as an abrasive, could cut through limestone. It was slow, it was labor-intensive, but it worked. Granite for the burial chamber was brought from Aswan, 600 miles to the south, floated down the Nile on barges during the flood season when the water was high enough to carry such massive loads. A single granite block weighing 80 tons would require a barge of substantial size and careful handling. These stones then had to be moved from the river to the pyramid site, perhaps on sledges, perhaps on rollers, perhaps on a combination of both. The outer casing stones were fine white limestone from Tura, across the river from Giza, chosen for its brightness and its fine grain that could be polished to a mirror shine. Originally, the Great Pyramid gleamed. Its polished white surface reflected the sun. From a distance, it would have appeared as a mountain of light, radiating brilliance across the desert. Most of these casing stones were stripped away in later centuries, used for building projects in Cairo, but a few remain at the top of Khafra's pyramid, giving us a glimpse of how all the pyramids once looked. Getting the stones to the building site required ramps. We have found remnants of ramps at various pyramid sites, but we have not found a ramp big enough to reach the top of the Great Pyramid. Some archaeologists think the ramps spiraled around the pyramid, rising as the pyramid rose. Some think they were internal, built into the structure itself and later filled in. Some think a combination of straight ramps and levers were used, with techniques changing as the pyramid grew taller and the engineering challenges evolved. Some researchers have proposed that water was used to lubricate sledges and reduce friction. Wetting the sand in front of the sledge creates a firmer surface. that reduces drag by up to 50%. We have an Egyptian tomb painting showing workers pouring water in front of a sledge carrying a massive statue, which supports this theory. The truth is, we do not know. The Egyptians kept the secret if there was a single secret to keep. Perhaps the knowledge was lost during the intermediate periods when central authority collapsed. Perhaps it was never written down because it was transmitted orally between generations of master builders. Perhaps there were multiple methods, and we have only found traces of some. What we know is the result, the Great Pyramid, Khufu's eternity machine, his guarantee that he would be remembered forever. And in this at least he succeeded. Inside the pyramid, passages lead to chambers. The descending passage goes down into the bedrock beneath the pyramid, leading to an unfinished subterranean chamber, perhaps the original burial location before plans changed. The ascending passage climbs upward into the heart of the pyramid, opening into the grand gallery, a soaring corbelled passage with a ceiling 9 meters high. This leads to the king's chamber, a rectangular room lined with red granite from Aswan. In the king's chamber sits an empty granite sarcophagus. No lid, no body. Was Khufu ever buried here? Was his mummy stolen in antiquity? Or was the pyramid itself a cenotaph, a memorial monument while his actual body was buried elsewhere? We do not know. The pyramid has been open since at least the 9th century AD, when the Caliph al-Ma'mun's men tunneled into it searching for treasure. They found empty chambers and broken stone. Above the king's chamber, 5 stress-relieving chambers distribute the weight of the pyramid, so the king's chamber is not crushed. The topmost stress-relieving chamber has a pointed ceiling, the only place inside the pyramid where the builders acknowledged the pyramid shape. These chambers were never meant to be seen. They are engineering solutions, hidden voids that make the visible chambers possible. Khufu's son Khafre builds the second pyramid at Giza, slightly smaller but appearing taller because it is built on higher ground. Near it, the Great Sphinx is carved, a lion's body with a human head, 63 meters long, cut from a single outcrop of limestone. The face probably represents Khafre himself, though this too is debated. The Sphinx gazes eternally eastward toward the rising sun. When was the Sphinx carved? Probably during Khafre's reign, as part of his pyramid complex. But some researchers have argued it is much older, pointing to water erosion on its body that seems inconsistent with the dry climate of dynastic Egypt. Could it have been carved during a wetter climate thousands of years earlier? Most Egyptologists reject this, attributing the erosion to other factors. But the debate illustrates how much mystery remains, even with monuments we have studied for centuries. Menkaure, Khafre's successor, builds the third pyramid, smaller still but no less perfect in proportion. The Giza pyramid complex is complete. 3 pyramids dominating the plateau, smaller pyramids for queens nearby, causeways leading from valley temples to mortuary temples, the Sphinx keeping watch, entire cities for the dead. And then the pyramid age ends, not immediately. Small pyramids continue to be built, but nothing on the scale of the Giza complex. The resources required are too enormous. The centralized control necessary is too demanding, and something is shifting in Egyptian society. Around 2,200 years before Christ, the Old Kingdom collapses. The causes are multiple and interconnected. Climate change is one factor. Analysis of sediment cores from the Nile and archaeological evidence from the region suggest that flood levels decline during this period. Smaller floods mean smaller harvests. Smaller harvests mean less surplus. Less surplus means less ability to support the massive bureaucracy and priesthood that the Old Kingdom had created. Administrative decentralization is another factor. Provincial governors, nomarchs they are called, had been growing more powerful throughout the Old Kingdom. Initially appointed by the pharaoh, these positions became hereditary. Nomarchs began to see themselves as local rulers rather than royal appointees. They built their own tombs in their own provinces rather than being buried near the pharaoh's pyramid. They kept more tax revenue for local use rather than sending it to Memphis. Economic strain from pyramid building plays a role. The Great Pyramid required decades of organized labor. The pyramid complexes required permanent staffs of priests to maintain the cults of dead pharaohs. All of this was expensive. As more pyramids were built, more resources were diverted to maintaining them. The economy became top-heavy, oriented towards serving the dead rather than supporting the living. Perhaps there was a long-reigning pharaoh, Pepit II, supposedly ruled for 94 years. This may be an exaggeration, followed by rapid succession of weak kings unable to hold the kingdom together. Whatever the specific triggers, Egypt fractures. The first intermediate period begins. The archaeological record becomes sparse and confused. Multiple kings rule simultaneously in different regions. Foreign incursions occur in the delta. The elegant certainty of the Old Kingdom vanishes into chaos. Egyptian texts from this period describe the horror. The land spins round as does a potter's wheel. Robbers are now nobles, and nobles are stripped of their possessions. The poor man has become wealthy, while he who could not afford sandals now owns riches. This is from the Admonitions of Ippur, a text that describes social breakdown, though scholars debate whether it describes actual historical events or is a literary device, a warning about what happens when Ma'at collapses. And yet, Egypt does not disappear. The civilization continues, the writing continues, the religion continues, the fundamental identity continues. Egypt has its first collapse, and Egypt survives. This will become a pattern. Egypt will collapse and reunify multiple times over the next 1,000 years, but it will always remain Egyptian. The language evolves but does not change fundamentally. The gods remain the same. The belief in Ma'at persists. The conviction that Egypt is the center of the world, that the Nile is the source of life, that the pharaoh is divine. These ideas survive political chaos. This is what makes Egypt different. Other civilizations collapse and are replaced. Egypt collapses and reconstitutes itself. Around 2100 years before Christ, a ruler named Mentuhotep II reunifies Egypt from Thebes. The Middle Kingdom begins. This is Egypt's classical age, the age of literature and art that later Egyptians will regard as the pinnacle of cultural achievement. Thebes, far to the south in Upper Egypt, had been a provincial town during the Old Kingdom, but during the first intermediate period, its ruling family, the Intefs, built power while other regions fought among themselves. Mentuhotep II completes what his predecessors started. He defeats the rival dynasty ruling from Heracleopolis in Middle Egypt. He brings the delta back under central control. He restores the two lands to unity. But this is a different Egypt. The Old Kingdom pharaohs ruled from Memphis and built their pyramids at Giza and Saqqara. The Middle Kingdom pharaohs rule from Thebes and build their monuments in Upper Egypt. The balance of power has shifted southward. Thebes will remain central to Egyptian civilization for the next 1500 years. Its local god, Amun, will rise to become king of the gods. The massive temple complex at Karnak, dedicated to Amun, will grow over centuries into one of the largest religious structures ever built. Thebes will be the capital of empire, the city of 100 gates, as Homer will call it. The tale of Sinuhe is composed during this period. It tells of an Egyptian official who flees Egypt after the pharaoh's death, lives among Asiatics in Canaan, achieves success there, marries, has children, becomes a respected leader. But ultimately he yearns to return home to Egypt and be buried in Egyptian soil according to Egyptian custom. The story is beautifully written. Sinuhe describes his prosperity in exile. It was a good land called Ya. Figs were in it, and grapes. It had more wine than water. Abundant was its honey, plentiful its oil. All kinds of fruit were on its trees. Barley was there and emmer, and no end of cattle of all kinds. But despite this abundance, despite his success, Sinuhe is miserable. He writes to the pharaoh begging permission to return. What matters more than my being buried in the land in which I was born? The pharaoh grants permission. Sinuhe returns to Egypt, is received at court, is given a tomb, dies content. It is a story about the pull of home, about cultural identity, about the Egyptian conviction that Egypt is the center of the world and everywhere else is exile. No matter how pleasant foreign lands might be, they are not Egypt, and to die outside Egypt, to be buried in foreign soil, is the ultimate tragedy. The prophecy of Nefertiti is also composed now. It purports to be an ancient text from the Old Kingdom, predicting the collapse of central authority and the rise of the Middle Kingdom reunifiers, but it is actually a contemporary work written to justify the new regime. It describes the chaos of the intermediate period. The land is diminished, its rulers are increased, the land is poor, its supervisors are many, and promises that a great king from the south will restore order. This is propaganda, but it is sophisticated propaganda. It establishes the Middle Kingdom rulers as fulfilling ancient prophecy, as restoring Maat after a period of Isfet. It creates legitimacy through narrative. The Middle Kingdom pharaohs are great builders, but they do not build pyramids like the Old Kingdom. They build fortresses. Massive mud brick fortresses at the Second Cataract, defending Egypt's southern border against Nubian incursion and controlling access to the gold mines and trade routes beyond. These fortresses are extraordinary structures, thick walls with protruding bastions, moats, drawbridges, carefully designed fields of fire that allow archers to cover all approaches. They are military architecture of a sophistication that will not be seen again until the medieval period, over 2,000 years later. Egypt is expanding. Egypt is consolidating. The Nubian territories to the south are brought under Egyptian control. Trade expeditions are sent to Punt on the Red Sea coast. Mining operations in Sinai extract copper and turquoise. Egypt is prosperous. The bureaucracy is efficient. Art flourishes. Literature flourishes. The Middle Kingdom will later be remembered as a golden age, and then it ends. Around 1700 years before Christ, Egypt enters another period of fragmentation. The second intermediate period begins. And this time the chaos is worse because this time foreign rulers will sit on the throne of Egypt. Around 1600 years before Christ, Egypt is invaded. The Hyksos come. Their name means rulers of foreign lands in Egyptian, Heka Kasut, but they are probably from Canaan or Syria. They do not invade in a single campaign, armies marching across the desert. They infiltrate. Merchants and settlers gradually arriving in the Nile Delta, building settlements, growing in power, and then, when they are strong enough, taking control. The process takes decades, perhaps over a century. At first, they are foreign merchants trading in Delta cities. Then they are foreign quarters within Egyptian cities. Then they are foreign-controlled cities within Egypt. Then they are a foreign dynasty claiming the title of pharaoh. The Hyksos establish their capital at Avaris in the eastern delta. From there they rule Lower Egypt. Native Egyptian kings continue to rule Upper Egypt from Thebes, paying tribute to the Hyksos. The second intermediate period. Egypt is divided again, but this time the division is different. This time foreign rulers sit in Memphis and claim the title of pharaoh. For Egyptians this is traumatic. For 1500 years Egypt has been Egyptian, the pharaoh has been divine, the kingdom has been the center of the world. Foreign lands are chaotic, uncivilized, inferior. And now foreigners rule Egypt. Foreigners wearing the double crown, foreigners making offerings to Egyptian gods. It is an inversion of the natural order. It is Isfet made manifest. The Hyksos bring new technology: the horse, the chariot, the composite bow made of wood, horn, and sinew, more powerful than anything Egypt has known. Bronze working of superior quality, new military tactics. Egypt, protected for so long by geography, learns what it means to face an enemy with superior weapons. But the Hyksos also adopt Egyptian culture. They write their names in hieroglyphs. They worship Egyptian gods, though they also maintain their own deities. They present themselves as legitimate pharaohs. In some ways, the Hyksos invasion is less a foreign conquest than a hostile takeover, foreigners claiming Egyptian identity while remaining distinctively foreign. Still, Egyptian memory will portray the Hyksos period as a time of humiliation and suffering. Later texts will exaggerate Hyksos cruelty and Egyptian suffering to make the eventual liberation more glorious. The Hyksos become, in Egyptian historical consciousness, the great enemy, the eternal other, the symbol of foreign threat. This is Egypt's trauma. This is the wound that will shape everything that comes after. Around 1550 years before Christ, Amosdoun drives out the Hyksos. He is a king from Thebes, continuing the resistance that his father and grandfather began. He besieges Avaris. He takes it. He pursues the Hyksos into Canaan. He destroys their strongholds. He reunifies Egypt under native rule and founds the 18th dynasty. The new kingdom begins. But Egypt is different now. Egypt has learned fear. Egypt has learned that isolation is not perfect protection. Egypt has learned that there are enemies beyond the deserts who have weapons Egypt does not have, and ambitions that threaten Egyptian security. The new kingdom will not make the mistake of passivity again. The new kingdom will become an empire. Ahmos's successors campaign aggressively. Amenhotep I secures the southern border and pushes into Nubia. Thutmose I extends Egyptian control deep into Nubia, establishing Egyptian administration and extracting tribute. He also campaigns in Syria, reaching the Euphrates River, setting up a stela to mark the extent of Egyptian power. The pharaohs of the new kingdom are not content to defend Egypt. They will expand it. Thutmose I is also significant for another reason. He is the father of one of the most remarkable figures in Egyptian history, Hatshepsut. She is the daughter of Thutmose I and his great wife Ahmose. She marries her half-brother Thutmose II, as is royal custom. This is not unusual in Egyptian royal families, where sibling marriage is practiced to keep the bloodline pure and to concentrate power within the family. When Thutmose II dies after a short reign, his son by a lesser wife, Thutmose III, is too young to rule. Hatshepsut becomes regent. For a few years she rules on behalf of her stepson. She is depicted in traditional queen's regalia, supporting the young king. But gradually the imagery changes. She begins to be depicted in pharaoh's regalia. She wears the royal kilt. She wears the false beard. She holds the crook and flail. She is no longer regent. She is pharaoh. And then Hatshepsut does something unprecedented. She declares herself pharaoh, not queen, not regent, pharaoh, co-ruler with Thutmose III at first, but clearly the senior partner. She wears the false beard, that artificial beard that pharaohs wear, as a symbol of their office. She wears the crown. She is depicted in male clothing in official art, though inscriptions often use feminine grammatical forms when referring to her, creating a strange hybrid that acknowledges her female identity while asserting her pharaonic role. She rules for 22 years. She rules well. Her legitimacy is questioned, obviously. How can a woman be pharaoh? The pharaoh is Horus incarnate. Horus is male. The pharaoh is the son of Ra. How can a woman fulfill this role? Hatshepsut addresses this through propaganda and theology. She claims that her true father is Amun, king of the gods, who came to her mother in the form of Thutmose the stood and conceived her. Therefore she is the divine daughter of Amun, just as male pharaohs are divine sons. She commissions elaborate reliefs depicting this divine birth, showing Amun and her mother together, showing her birth attended by goddesses, showing her divine destiny proclaimed from birth. She also emphasizes her royal lineage through her human father, Thutmose, Earth, a great warrior king. She presents herself as his chosen heir, selected by him to continue his legacy. Whether Thutmose the Foreman actually intended her to rule is unclear, but Hatshepsut's propaganda asserts it as fact. Hatshepsut does not wage wars of conquest. She sends trading expeditions instead. The most famous is to the land of Punt, somewhere on the East African coast or southern Arabia. The exact location remains debated. The expedition is massive, involving 5 ships carrying soldiers, traders, and diplomats. The expedition brings back myrrh trees transplanted live in pots so they can be planted in Egypt, exotic animals, gold, ivory, ebony, cinnamon, incense. It is commemorated in elaborate reliefs on the walls of her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahri, one of the most beautiful architectural achievements in all of Egypt. The reliefs show the ships departing Egypt. They show the arrival in Punt, depicting the round houses of the Punt people built on stilts, the landscape of palms and myrrh trees, the Queen of Punt, depicted as extremely obese, which has led to medical speculation about what condition she might have had. They show the loading of the ships with treasures. They show the triumphant return to Egypt and the presentation of goods to Hatshepsut and Amun. The temple itself is a masterpiece. Built into the cliffs on the west bank of the Nile at Thebes, it rises in 3 terraces connected by ramps. Colonnades run along each terrace, creating rhythmic patterns of light and shadow. The architecture integrates with the landscape. The vertical cliffs behind echo the vertical columns of the terraces. It is a harmonious integration of architecture and landscape, a statement in stone. The temple is also a statement of legitimacy. Hatshepsut's claim to the throne is depicted in reliefs throughout. Her divine birth, her coronation, her great achievements, the Punt expedition, building projects, military victories. Yes, she did conduct some military campaigns despite her reputation as a peaceful ruler. The temple is propaganda, but it is beautiful propaganda. Hatshepsut builds extensively. Throughout Egypt, she erects obelisks at Karnak. One still stands. The tallest obelisk remaining at Karnak, its tip covered in electrum, an alloy of gold and silver that would have caught the sun and blazed with light. She restores temples damaged during the Hyksos period. She builds shrines and way stations for religious processions. Her reign is prosperous and architecturally productive. When Hatshepsut dies around 1400 years before Christ, Thutmose III takes full control, and Thutmose III has been waiting. For 20 years after Hatshepsut's death, Thutmose III does nothing to her memory. He rules, he campaigns, he fights battles, he extends the empire, but he leaves Hatshepsut's monuments alone. But then, in his 42nd year of reign, he orders her name erased, her images defaced, her monuments destroyed or usurped. Workmen chisel away her name from inscriptions and replace it with the names of earlier pharaohs, Thutmose I, Thutmose II, even Thutmose III himself. Her statues are smashed, broken into pieces, thrown into quarries. Her reliefs are defaced, her figure hammered away from the stone. Egyptologists have debated why. Was it personal vendetta, anger at being overshadowed for decades, political necessity to legitimize his own reign and the succession of his son, theological anxiety about a female pharaoh disturbing Ma'at, creating a precedent that could destabilize the divine order? Most scholars now think it was political. Late in his reign, Thutmose III needed to ensure his son's succession would be unchallenged. Hatshepsut's successful reign as a female pharaoh created a dangerous precedent. By erasing her from the record, Thutmose III was not attacking her personally, but was making sure future generations would not point to her as justification for unconventional succession. The attempt at erasure was not entirely successful. Enough inscriptions survived in hard-to-reach places. Enough statues were buried rather than completely destroyed. Enough remained that modern archaeology could piece together her story. Hatshepsut was forgotten for thousands of years, but she was not erased. She is remembered now, perhaps more famous in our time than most of the male pharaohs who tried to eclipse her. We do not know. What we know is that Thutmose III was one of Egypt's greatest military pharaohs. He campaigned 17 times in Syria and Palestine. He extended Egyptian control to the Euphrates River. He fought the Battle of Megiddo against a coalition of Canaanite cities and won decisively. He was called the Napoleon of Egypt by later historians, and the comparison is not unfair. The Battle of Megiddo is the first battle in history for which we have detailed tactical information. Egyptian records describe how the enemy coalition gathered at Megiddo, a strategic fortress controlling the main pass through the Carmel Ridge. They describe how Thutmose III rejected his general's advice to take safe, predictable routes and instead led his army through a narrow, dangerous pass that emerged directly in front of Megiddo, surprising the enemy. They describe the battle itself, chariots clashing, infantry engaging, the enemy breaking and fleeing back to the city. The Egyptians pursue, but when they stop to loot the enemy camp, the enemy has time to close the city gates. A siege begins, lasting 7 months. Eventually, Megiddo surrenders. Enormous tribute is collected. The princes of the coalition submit to Egyptian authority. Thutmose III campaigns again and again, ensuring that Egypt's northern territories remain under control. He establishes a system of garrisons and local governors. He takes hostages, sons of foreign princes brought to Egypt to be educated in Egyptian ways, ensuring their loyalty when they return to rule their own cities. Egypt is now an empire. Egyptian garrisons control key cities in Canaan and Syria. Egyptian governors administer foreign territories. Foreign princes send their sons to be educated in Egypt, both as honor and as hostages. Tribute flows to Thebes, gold from Nubia, cedar from Lebanon, horses from Syria, lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, exotic goods from across the known world. The pharaohs grow wealthy. The temples grow wealthy. The priests of Amun become extraordinarily powerful, controlling vast estates, enormous treasuries, commanding influence that rivals the pharaoh himself. Egypt is at the height of its power. And then comes the heretic. Amenhotep IV ascends to the throne around 1350 years before Christ. He is a young man, possibly suffering from a genetic disorder that gives him an elongated skull and feminine features, though this diagnosis is debated from skeletal evidence that may or may not be his. He rules jointly with his father Amenhotep III at first, then alone, and within a few years he overturns Egyptian religion. For 1500 years Egyptians have worshipped many gods. Ra and Amun have merged into Amun-Ra, king of the gods. Osiris rules the underworld, offering the promise of eternal life to those who live justly and perform the correct funerary rituals. Isis works her magic, protecting the vulnerable, healing the sick. Horus watches over the pharaoh, embodying kingship. Hundreds of gods and goddesses, each with their temples, their priesthoods, their festivals, their roles in the cosmic order. Amenhotep IV announces that there is one God, one Aten, The sun disk, not the sun god Ra, with his falcon head, and solar disk, not Amun-Ra, the hidden one who is king of the gods, the actual physical disk of the sun, the visible manifestation of divine power. This is radical. This is revolutionary. This breaks with everything Egypt has believed for a millennium and a half. He changes his name from Amenhotep, Amun is satisfied, to Akhenaten, beneficial to Aten. He closes the temples of the other gods. He defunds their priesthoods. He orders the name of Amun chiseled out of inscriptions throughout Egypt, a direct attack on the most powerful religious institution in the kingdom. He builds a new capital city in the middle of nowhere, a virgin site with no previous religious associations, Akhetaten, horizon of the Aten. Modern scholars call it Amarna, after the name of the nearby modern village. The city rises from nothing in the desert, a planned capital designed around the worship of the Aten. The royal family moves to Amarna. Akhenaten's chief wife is Nefertiti, whose painted bust, discovered in a sculptor's workshop at Amarna and now in Berlin, will become one of the most famous artworks in the world. That face, serene and beautiful, with her tall blue crown and graceful neck, is recognized globally. But she was more than just a beautiful face. She was Akhenaten's partner in the religious revolution, depicted in reliefs making offerings to the Aten alongside her husband, an equal participant in the new cult. They have 6 daughters. Art from this period shows intimate family scenes, Akhenaten and Nefertiti playing with their children under the rays of the Aten, which are depicted as ending in small hands offering the Ankh, the hieroglyph for life. The royal family eats together. They kiss their daughters. They are shown in private, informal moments. This is unlike anything in previous Egyptian art. Pharaohs are shown performing rituals, striking down enemies, sitting enthroned in majesty. They are not shown as fathers playing with children. They are not shown kissing their wives. The Amarna art style is personal, human, strange. The art also depicts the royal family with elongated skulls, swelling hips, protruding bellies, long, thin faces. Is this realistic portraiture showing actual physical characteristics? Is it stylistic exaggeration meant to convey some theological concept? Is it evidence of a genetic disorder affecting the royal family? Scholars debate endlessly. Scholars debate whether Akhenaten's religion was truly monotheistic or simply a radical form of henotheism, focusing on one god while not denying the existence of others. The evidence is ambiguous. Some texts suggest only the Aten exists. Others might allow that other gods exist but are irrelevant. What is clear is that it was revolutionary. It broke with 1,500 years of tradition. It threatened the power of the most influential institution in Egypt, the priesthood of Amun. Why did Akhenaten do this? Was it genuine religious conviction, a visionary experiencing monotheistic revelation? Was it a political move to break the power of the Amun priesthood, which had grown wealthy and influential enough to challenge royal authority? Was it personal psychology, a young man with a mission to reshape the world according to his vision? We do not know. Akhenaten's motivations died with him. What we know is that the revolution was imposed from above and never fully accepted by the people. The old gods remained popular. Amulets of the old deities have been found in workers' houses at Amarna. People still prayed to Isis and Osiris and the familiar gods, even as official religion focused exclusively on the Aten. Akhenaten rules for 17 years. Foreign policy suffers. The Amarna letters, diplomatic correspondence found in the ruins of Akhetaten, show vassal states in Canaan and Syria pleading for Egyptian military support against invaders. Akhenaten sends little help. His attention is focused on his religious transformation of Egypt, not on maintaining the empire. When he dies, around 1336 years before Christ, the revolution dies with him. His son, possibly by a lesser wife, is a boy of about 9 years old. His birth name is Tutankhamun, living image of Aten. Within a few years, his name changes to Tutankhamun, living image of Amun. The message is clear. The old gods are back. The court returns to Thebes. Amarna is abandoned. The city that was built in a few years to be the eternal capital of the Aten cult is deserted. Sand drifts through its streets. Its temples fall silent. It will lie abandoned for over 3,000 years until archaeologists rediscover it, finding in its ruins an extraordinary window into a brief, strange moment in Egyptian history. The temples of Amun are reopened, the priesthoods are refunded, Amarna is abandoned. Within a generation, Akhenaten's monuments are destroyed. His name is erased from king lists. He becomes the enemy or the criminal of Akhenaten in official records. Egypt does not forgive heresy. Tutankhamun rules for about 9 years. He is a boy king guided by advisors. The elderly courtier A becomes something like a regent. The general Horemheb controls the military. Tutankhamun himself is a figurehead, restoring orthodoxy but not wielding real power. He dies around age 19. We do not know why. His mummy shows a leg fracture shortly before death and evidence of malaria. Genetic analysis suggests he was the product of sibling marriage and suffered from inherited disorders: cleft palate, clubfoot, spinal deformities. He may have died from infection following the leg fracture. He may have died from malaria. He may have died from complications of genetic disease. He may have been murdered, though most scholars now reject this theory. We do not know. What we know is that he was buried in a small tomb in the Valley of the Kings, probably not the tomb originally intended for him. His death was unexpected. The burial was rushed. A tomb intended for a noble was repurposed for a pharaoh. The tomb was filled with treasures and sealed, and then forgotten. Tutankhamun's successors deliberately erased him from memory as they erased his father. The Amarna period became an embarrassment. Official king lists skip from Amenhotep III to Horemheb, as if Akhenaten, Tutankhamun, and the brief reign of I never existed. The tomb remained hidden. Subsequent burials in the valley sent debris cascading down the hillside, covering the entrance. Workers building the tomb of Ramesses VI 200 years later unknowingly placed their huts over the sealed door. 3,200 years pass, and then Howard Carter makes his hole in the wall and sees wonderful things, but we are getting ahead of ourselves. We are still in the New Kingdom. Egypt is still powerful. Tutankhamun's advisor A takes the throne briefly after the boy king's death, ruling for 4 years. Then Tutankhamun's general, Horemheb, takes the throne and restores full orthodoxy. He dismantles what remains of the Amarna experiment. He destroys monuments. He erases names. He claims in his inscriptions to have restored order after chaos, to have rebuilt temples and refunded priesthoods. Horemheb has no surviving children. On his deathbed, he chooses his vizier, a military officer named Permanence, to succeed him. Permanence becomes Ramesses I, founding the 19th dynasty. He rules for only 2 years, but his son, Seti, is a capable ruler who strengthens Egypt's hold on its territories. And then comes the pharaoh, who will define the new kingdom like no other, Ramesses II. He rules for 66 years, from 1279 to 1213 years before Christ. He lives to be over 90 years old. He outlives many of his children. He fathers over 100 children by various wives and concubines, ensuring the succession, though few of his early children survive him. He is a prodigious builder, a great warrior, a master of propaganda. He is Rameses the Great. In his 5th year, Rameses fights the Battle of Kadesh against the Hittite Empire in Syria. It is one of the largest chariot battles in history. The forces involved number in the tens of thousands. The stakes are control of the wealthy territories of Syria and access to trade routes. The battle nearly ends in disaster for Egypt. Rameses, leading one of 4 Egyptian divisions, advances toward Kadesh, ahead of the main army. Hittite spies, posing as deserters, tell him the Hittite army is far away. Rameses believes them. It is a trap. The Hittite army, hidden near Kadesh, attacks the 2nd Egyptian division as it approaches, scattering it. The survivors flee toward Rameses's camp with Hittite chariots in pursuit. Rameses finds himself surrounded, his army divided, facing annihilation. According to Egyptian accounts, Rameses calls out to Amun. He prays for divine assistance. Then he personally leads a charge that breaks the Hittite encirclement. His chariot squadron drives through the enemy. His courage rallies the surviving Egyptian forces. The 3rd Egyptian division arrives. The Hittites, having stopped to loot the Egyptian camp, are caught disorganized. The battle turns into a stalemate. Neither side wins decisively. The Egyptians hold the field but do not take Kadesh. The Hittites inflict heavy casualties but do not destroy the Egyptian army. Both sides claim victory. Egyptian records describe it as a great triumph. Hittite records claim it as a Hittite victory. Modern historians think it was probably a tactical draw that led to a strategic stalemate. What matters is what Rameses does with it. He commemorates Kadesh on temple walls across Egypt, massive reliefs showing Rameses single-handedly defeating hordes of enemies. He is depicted as larger than life, standing in his chariot, firing arrows, trampling enemies beneath his horse's hooves. The Hittite king is shown cowering. The enemy scatters before Egyptian might. Epic poems are composed describing his valor. His Majesty was alone by himself, none other with him. His Majesty proceeded to look about him and found surrounding him 2,500 chariot teams. Then His Majesty arose like his father Montu. He seized his weapons, he girded his armor, he plunged into the midst of the forces of the foe. It is propaganda, but it is effective propaganda. Rameses becomes the warrior pharaoh in Egyptian memory. The battle that was actually at best a draw becomes in official history one of the great triumphs of Egyptian arms. 16 years after Kadesh, Rameses and the Hittite king Hattusili III sign a peace treaty. It is one of the earliest recorded peace treaties in history. Copies survive in both Egyptian hieroglyphs and Hittite cuneiform. The terms establish a defensive alliance. If either kingdom is attacked, the other will provide military support. It establishes extradition of refugees. It establishes peace between the 2 great powers of the age. The treaty holds. Ramesses marries a Hittite princess. Peace prevails for the rest of his long reign. But Rameses is more than a warrior. He is a builder. He constructs more monuments than any other pharaoh. Everywhere you look in Egypt, you find Ramesses' name. He completes the great hypostyle hall at Karnak, 134 massive columns, the central ones 21 meters high and over 3 meters in diameter, creating a stone forest of overwhelming scale. Walk through that hall even now, 3,000 years later. The columns tower above you. Light filters through the stone lattice windows high above, creating shifting patterns of light and shadow. The walls are covered with reliefs. The ceiling, where it survives, is decorated with stars. You feel small. You feel the weight of time. You feel the power of the god and the pharaoh who built this place. Rameses builds his mortuary temple, the Ramesseum. He builds additions to the temple at Luxor, including a massive pylon and a courtyard surrounded by columns. He usurps earlier monuments, carving his name over the names of previous pharaohs. This is common practice. Monuments are expensive. Adding your name to an existing monument is cheaper than building a new one, but Rameses does it on a scale that exceeds anyone else. And at Abu Simbel, on the border with Nubia, he creates his masterpiece. Abu Simbel is not a building, it is a cliff. Rameses orders his workers to carve directly into the rock face. They create a facade where 4 colossal statues of Rameses sit on thrones, each statue 20 meters tall. He wears the double crown. He gazes out over the desert and the Nile. His hands rest on his knees. His expression is serene, confident, eternal. Between and beside the statues, smaller figures, his queen Nefertari, his mother, his children, but they barely reach the knee height of the colossal Rameses figures. The message is clear: the pharaoh is beyond human scale. Inside the cliff, a temple extends 60 meters into the rock, a series of halls, each smaller and darker than the last, leading to the inner sanctuary. Statues line the halls, all of Rameses over and over, Rameses as Osiris, Rameses making offerings, Rameses in various crowns and poses. The inner sanctuary contains 4 statues seated side by side: Ra-Harakti, the sun god; Amun-Ra, king of the gods; Ptah, god of craftsmen; and Rameses himself, seated as an equal among the gods. Twice a year, on the anniversary of Rameses's coronation and birth, the rising sun aligns perfectly with the temple entrance and illuminates the inner sanctuary. Light penetrates 60 meters through the darkness and strikes the faces of the gods and the deified Rameses. For a few minutes, the sanctuary blazes with sunlight. Then the sun rises higher and the light retreats, and the sanctuary returns to darkness for another 6 months. This is engineering, this is astronomy, this is theology, this is a display of power and knowledge and divine status carved into living rock. It is a monument that will last forever, or so Rameses intends. Nearby, Rameses builds a smaller temple for his beloved queen Nefertari. It too is carved into the cliff face. It too has colossal statues at the entrance, 4 of Rameses and 2 of Nefertari, equal in size, which is unusual. The temple is dedicated to Hathor, goddess of love and beauty, and to Nefertari herself. The inscription reads, "Rameses II has made a temple, excavated in the mountain, of eternal workmanship for the chief queen Nefertari, beloved of Mut in Nubia, forever and ever, Nefertari for whose sake the very sun does shine." It is a love poem in stone. It is propaganda asserting Egyptian power in Nubia. It is religious devotion to Hathor. It is all of these things at once. He dies in 1213. His mummy survives. It was discovered in a cache of royal mummies in the 19th century, where priests had moved it in antiquity to protect it from tomb robbers. When the mummy was examined in modern times, when they unwrapped the linen, they found his face still recognizable, his hair still red, though faded to white blonde, his features strong, his body showing the diseases of old age, arthritis, dental abscesses, hardening of the arteries. He looks like a man who ruled for 66 years and died satisfied that he had achieved immortality. He was right about immortality, though not in the way he imagined. His name endures, his monuments endure. Shelley's poem Ozymandias, Ozymandias being the Greek rendering of one of Rameses's names, imagines his statue broken in the desert, a commentary on the futility of human pride. But the real Rameses has not been forgotten. His statues still stand, his temples still receive visitors. He he succeeded in making himself remembered. But Egypt itself is about to enter its long decline. The decades after Ramesses II see increasing pressure on Egypt. His son Merneptah faces invasions from Libyan tribes allied with mysterious groups the Egyptians call the Sea Peoples. These Sea Peoples, a coalition of groups from across the eastern Mediterranean whose exact identity remains debated, attack Egypt's coasts and destabilize the entire region. Ramesses III of the 20th dynasty repels them in a series of battles depicted on the walls of his mortuary temple at Medinet Habu. The reliefs show naval battles, the earliest depictions of naval warfare we have, with Egyptian and enemy ships grappling, archers firing, men falling into the water. They show land battles with chariots and infantry. They show masses of prisoners being led away. Ramesses III wins, but at enormous cost. The Bronze Age collapse is underway. Trade networks fail. Cities across the eastern Mediterranean are destroyed. The Hittite Empire collapses entirely. Mycenaean Greece falls. The great civilizations of the late Bronze Age are ending. Egypt survives but diminished. The empire is lost. Syria and Canaan slip away from Egyptian control. The economy contracts, the power of the pharaoh weakens. The power of the priests of Amun grows. By the end of the New Kingdom, the high priest of Amun at Thebes rivals the pharaoh in wealth and influence. The New Kingdom ends around 1069 years before Christ. The third intermediate period begins. Egypt fragments again. Libyan dynasties rule in some regions, descended from Libyan soldiers who settled in Egypt and gradually took power. Nubian pharaohs rule in others. Coming from the south to claim the legacy of the great pharaohs, the empire is gone, the wealth is gone, the certainty is gone, and yet Egypt continues. Temples are maintained, mummies are made, hieroglyphs are carved. The essential pattern persists even as political unity fails. Egypt will be conquered by Assyria in the 7th century before Christ. The Assyrian king Ashurbanipal sacks Thebes in 663 BC, carrying away massive amounts of treasure. But the Assyrian Empire is overstretched. It cannot hold Egypt. Briefly, native pharaohs of the 26th dynasty drive out the Assyrians and restore independence. This Site period, named for the city of Sais in the Delta, is a final flowering of native Egyptian rule. But it is self-consciously archaic, looking back to the glories of the Old Kingdom and Middle Kingdom, trying to recreate a past that is already ancient. Then Persia conquers Egypt in 525. The Persian king Cambyses becomes pharaoh, founding the 27th dynasty. For 200 years, Persian kings will be pharaohs, mostly ruling from distant capitals, treating Egypt as a province. Some adopt Egyptian customs and maintain Egyptian temples. Others are harsh, extracting tribute and showing little respect for Egyptian traditions. Egyptian memory will remember them as foreign oppressors, though the reality is more complicated. In 332 years before Christ, Alexander the Great arrives. He is welcomed. The Persians were harsh rulers, particularly in the final decades. Alexander presents himself as a liberator. He visits the oracle of Amun at Siwa Oasis, deep in the western desert, where the priests declare him son of Amun. Whether this is sincere religious experience or political theatre, it works. Alexander is accepted as pharaoh. He founds Alexandria on the Mediterranean coast, envisioning a great city that will link Egypt to the Greek world. He stays in Egypt less than a year, leaving to continue his conquest of the Persian Empire. He will never return. He dies in Babylon in 323 BC, at age 32. When Alexander dies, his empire fragments. His generals, the Diadochi, fight over the pieces. Ptolemy, one of Alexander's most trusted commanders, seizes Egypt. He has Alexander's body brought to Egypt and buried in Alexandria, a powerful symbol of legitimacy. Ptolemy becomes pharaoh, founding the Ptolemaic dynasty. The Ptolemies are Macedonian Greeks, not Egyptians. They speak Greek. They rule from Alexandria, a Greek city where the official language is Greek, the culture is Greek, the architecture is Greek. But they present themselves as pharaohs. They build temples in Egyptian style. They are depicted in Egyptian art wearing Egyptian crowns. They understand that to rule Egypt, you must participate in Egyptian mythology. For 300 years, the Ptolemies rule. They are not particularly good rulers. They fight civil wars among themselves, brother against brother, sister against brother, mother against son. They murder relatives to secure power. They practice sibling marriage to keep power within the family, not for religious reasons as the native pharaohs did, but simply as a Greek royal custom borrowed from Egyptian practice. But they maintain Egyptian traditions even as they Hellenize the country's elite. The temples continue to function. The priests continue their rituals. Hieroglyphs are still carved on temple walls, even as Greek becomes the language of administration and commerce. Egypt is becoming a hybrid culture, Egyptian and Greek, intertwined. And then comes the last pharaoh. Cleopatra VII is born in 69 years before Christ. She is the daughter of Ptolemy V, a weak king whose rule was challenged multiple times. When he dies, she is 18 years old. According to custom, she marries her younger brother, Ptolemy IX, who is 10. They are supposed to rule jointly. Instead, they fight for sole power. Cleopatra is driven out of Alexandria by a faction supporting her brother. She raises an army in Syria. She is preparing to invade Egypt when Julius Caesar arrives in 48, pursuing his rival Pompey after the Battle of Pharsalus in the Roman Civil War. Pompey flees to Egypt, seeking refuge. Ptolemy X's advisors, thinking to win Caesar's favor, murder Pompey and present his head to Caesar when he arrives. Caesar is disgusted. Pompey was his son-in-law and his rival, but murdering him is dishonorable. Caesar occupies Alexandria. The story says Cleopatra has herself smuggled into Caesar's presence rolled up in a carpet, or in some versions, in a sack used for bedding. Whether this happened or not, it makes a good story, emphasizing Cleopatra's daring and cleverness. What certainly happened is that Cleopatra and Caesar become allies and lovers. Cleopatra is 21, Caesar is 52. He has the power of Rome behind him. She has the legitimacy of the Egyptian throne. Together they defeat Ptolemy III, who drowns in the Nile fleeing from battle. Cleopatra becomes sole ruler of Egypt, though she marries her younger brother Ptolemy XIV to maintain the appearance of traditional royal structure. She has a son, Caesarion, little Caesar, whom she claims is Caesar's child. Caesar neither confirms nor denies this. He returns to Rome, but brings Cleopatra with him, installing her in a villa across the Tiber. She is in Rome when Caesar is assassinated in 44 BC. Cleopatra returns to Egypt. Ptolemy X dies shortly after, possibly poisoned on Cleopatra's orders, though this is speculation. She makes Caesarion her co-ruler. She is sole effective ruler of Egypt, with a young son as ceremonial partner. The Roman Republic is tearing itself apart in civil war. Caesar's assassins, Brutus and Cassius, are defeated by Caesar's successors, Mark Antony, Octavian, and Lepidus, at the Battle of Philippi. The Roman world is divided among the victors. Octavian takes the west. Antony takes the east. Lepidus gets Africa but is soon sidelined. Mark Antony, one of Caesar's closest allies and a powerful general, summons Cleopatra to meet him at Tarsus in 41 BC. He wants Egyptian support for his planned campaign against Parthia. He wants to assess whether she remained loyal to Caesar's memory or has aligned with his assassins. She arrives in a barge with gilded stern and purple sails. The oarsmen row to the sound of flutes and lyres. The silver oars beat time to the music. Cleopatra herself reclines under a canopy of gold cloth, dressed as Aphrodite, the goddess of love. Beautiful attendants dressed as Nereids and Graces attend her. Incense burns, perfuming the air. It is theatre, it is seduction, it is statecraft, Antony is captivated. They become allies. They become lovers. They have 3 children together, twins Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene, and later a son Ptolemy Philadelphus. Antony marries Cleopatra by Egyptian rites, though he is already married to Octavia, sister of Octavian, by Roman law. Antony divorces Octavia, a profound insult to Octavian. He declares Caesarion the legitimate heir of Julius Caesar, not Octavian. He gives Cleopatra territories in the eastern Mediterranean, Cyprus, parts of Cilicia, parts of Phoenicia. He styles himself as the new Dionysus, god of wine and ecstasy, while Cleopatra is the new Isis. Rome is scandalized. Octavian uses this scandal masterfully. He portrays Antony as a Roman general corrupted by an Oriental queen, abandoning Roman values for Egyptian luxury and decadence. He portrays Cleopatra as a dangerous foreign seductress who has enslaved a great Roman, who threatens Rome itself with her ambitions. Octavian declares war, not on Antony, a Roman citizen, which would be civil war, but on Cleopatra, a foreign queen. It is a brilliant political move. Antony must either abandon Cleopatra or be cast as a traitor fighting for a foreign power against Rome. In 31 BC, Octavian's fleet, commanded by his general Agrippa, meets the combined forces of Antony and Cleopatra at Actium, on the western coast of Greece. The battle is not particularly large or decisive in military terms. The forces are roughly matched. The outcome is uncertain, but in the middle of the fighting, Cleopatra's ships withdraw, sailing out of the battle. Antony follows her, abandoning his fleet. Their ships scatter. Their army, watching from shore, is demoralized. It defects to Octavian over the following days. It is a catastrophic failure of morale and leadership. Why did they flee? Some ancient sources claim Cleopatra panicked. Some claim it was a planned withdrawal that went wrong. Some claim Antony panicked and Cleopatra followed him. We do not know. What we know is that the result was disaster. Antony and Cleopatra retreat to Alexandria. Octavian pursues, but slowly, consolidating his control of the eastern territories. He arrives at the gates of Alexandria in 30 BC. Antony's remaining forces defect. There is no army left to fight. Antony hears a false report that Cleopatra is dead. He falls on his sword, the Roman method of honorable suicide, but he does not die immediately. He is carried, bleeding, to Cleopatra's mausoleum, where she has barricaded herself with her treasure. He dies in her arms. Cleopatra is captured by Octavian's forces. She negotiates. She tries to seduce Octavian as she seduced Caesar and Antony, but Octavian is not interested in seduction. He is interested in parading her through Rome in his triumph, the captive queen displayed in chains, to validate his victory and warn other nations of Rome's power. Cleopatra realizes she will be humiliated. She will be paraded as a trophy. She will be mocked in Roman streets. This is unacceptable. On August 12th, 30 years before Christ, Cleopatra dies. The traditional story says she used a poisonous snake, an asp, perhaps an Egyptian cobra, smuggled to her in a basket of figs. She applies the snake to her breast. The venom stops her heart. She dies relatively peacefully, as do 2 of her handmaidens who die with her. Modern scholars debate this. Snake venom is unreliable. Death is not always quick or peaceful. Poison is more likely, perhaps cobra venom extracted and applied as a poison rather than through a snake bite, or perhaps a different poison entirely. But the snake makes a better story. The cobra is the symbol of Egyptian royalty, the uraeus that decorates the pharaoh's crown. To die by cobra is to die as a pharaoh, and stories are what survive. With Cleopatra dies the last pharaoh. Octavian annexes Egypt as a province of Rome, not a province of the Senate, but a personal possession of the emperor. Egypt becomes the breadbasket of Rome, shipping millions of tons of grain annually to feed the capital's masses. The temples continue, the priests continue, but there is no pharaoh. The throne is empty. 3,000 years, from Nama to Cleopatra, from the unification to the annexation. The longest continuous civilization in human history has ended. But has it? Egypt continues under Roman rule. The temples remain open. The priests continue their rituals. Hieroglyphs are still carved on temple walls, though fewer and fewer people can read them. The old gods are still worshipped. For another 400 years, Egypt remains recognizably Egyptian even under foreign control. The Roman emperors, ruling from distant Rome or Constantinople, are depicted on Egyptian temple walls as pharaohs, wearing the double crown, making offerings to Egyptian gods. It is fiction, but it is a fiction that maintains continuity. Egypt continues by absorbing its conquerors into Egyptian forms. Christianity comes to Egypt in the 1st century after Christ. Tradition says that St. Mark the Evangelist brought Christianity to Alexandria. The new religion spreads, particularly among the lower classes. The Coptic Church develops, a distinctly Egyptian form of Christianity. Gradually, the old religion fades, the temples close one by one, the priests die without successors. The knowledge is lost. The last person who can read hieroglyphs dies sometime in the 5th century. The script becomes mysterious symbols, beautiful but incomprehensible. Egypt forgets its own language. Arab armies conquer Egypt in 641 AD. Islam becomes the dominant religion. Arabic becomes the dominant language. Medieval Egypt is Islamic Egypt, part of a vast caliphate stretching from Spain to India. The old Egypt is buried under new layers of culture and language and belief. But the monuments remain. The pyramids are still there, dominating the landscape. The temples still stand in the desert. Tourists visit them, though they have no idea who built them or why. Medieval visitors imagine explanations. The pyramids are granaries built by Joseph in the Bible to store grain during the 7 years of plenty. They are astronomical observatories. They are repositories of ancient wisdom built by pre-flood civilizations or sorcerer kings. Myths multiply in the absence of knowledge. In 1798, Napoleon invades Egypt. He brings an army, but he also brings scientists and scholars, the savants of the Commission des Sciences et des Arts. They document everything. They measure the pyramids. They copy hieroglyphic inscriptions. They sketch temples and tombs. They collect artifacts. They compile the Description de l'Égypte, a massive scholarly work in multiple volumes that will introduce Europe to ancient Egypt. Napoleon's military campaign fails. The British defeat his fleet at the Battle of the Nile, trapping his army, but the scholarly mission succeeds. The description becomes a sensation in Europe, sparking Egyptomania that will last for decades. In 1799, French soldiers discover the Rosetta Stone while digging fortifications at the town of Rosetta in the Nile Delta. It is a granite slab inscribed with the same text in 3 scripts: hieroglyphic Egyptian, Demotic Egyptian, and ancient Greek. The same decree issued by priests in 196 BC, honoring Ptolemy the 3 languages, the same text 3 times, a key waiting to be turned. After Napoleon's defeat, the British seized the stone and take it to the British Museum, where it remains. For 20 years, scholars try to decipher it. They know the Greek text. They can see that certain symbols repeat in patterns suggesting they might be names, but they cannot crack the code. A young Frenchman named Jean-François Champollion, obsessed with Egypt since childhood, works on the problem for decades. He learns Coptic, the liturgical language of the Egyptian Christian Church, reasoning that it might preserve some elements of ancient Egyptian. He studies every hieroglyphic inscription available. He compares the 3 texts on the Rosetta Stone obsessively. In 1822, Champollion has a breakthrough. He realizes that hieroglyphs are not purely symbolic. They represent sounds. Some signs are ideograms representing whole words. Some are phonetic, representing sounds. Some are determinatives that clarify meaning without being pronounced. It is a complex system, but it is a system. Using the Greek text as a guide and his knowledge of Coptic, he begins matching hieroglyphic signs to sounds. He identifies the cartouche, the oval shape surrounding royal names, containing Ptolemy, then Cleopatra. The sounds match. The system works. He can read hieroglyphs. Champollion rushes to his brother's office in Paris and shouts, "Je tiens l'affaire! I've got it!" then collapses from exhaustion and emotion. The code is broken. Egypt can speak again. Egyptology is born as an academic discipline. Excavations begin across Egypt. Tombs are opened. Papyri are translated. Museums fill with Egyptian artifacts. The 19th and early 20th centuries see a global obsession with ancient Egypt. Egyptian motifs appear in architecture, fashion, art. The discovery of each new tomb makes international news. And then, in 1922, Howard Carter finds the tomb of Tutankhamun. We have come full circle. We have returned to that moment in the Valley of the Kings when Carter makes his hole in the wall and sees wonderful things. Carter has been searching for years, funded by Lord Carnarvon. The Valley of the Kings has been thoroughly explored. Most archaeologists believe every tomb has been found. But Carter is convinced one more tomb remains hidden. The tomb of Tutankhamun, the forgotten boy king whose name appears in king lists but whose burial place has never been found. He searches methodically, digging down to bedrock in grid sections across the valley floor. Season after season brings nothing. Carnarvon grows impatient. He agrees to fund one more season. If nothing is found, the search ends. In November 1922, a worker's hoe strikes stone. Steps. A stairway descending into the rock. Carter clears it carefully. A sealed doorway. The seals bear Tutankhamun's name. He sends a telegram to Carnarvon in England. At last have made wonderful discovery in valley, a magnificent tomb with seals intact. Recovered same for your arrival. Congratulations. Carnarvon arrives. They break through the doorway into a descending passage filled with rubble. At the end, another sealed door. This is the moment. November 26th, 1922. Carter makes a hole, inserts a candle, peers through. Can you see anything? Yes, wonderful things. The tomb is small. Tutankhamun was a minor king, but it is intact. Previous tombs in the valley were all robbed in antiquity. This one was entered by robbers shortly after Tutankhamun's burial. Some objects are disturbed, some jewelry is missing, but officials resealed it and it was never opened again. It remained hidden for 3,200 years, and it contains 5,398 objects. A golden throne showing Tutankhamun and his wife Ankhesenamun in intimate repose, the sun disk of the Aten shining above them, a relic from his father's religious revolution. A golden mask covering the mummy's face, 44 pounds of solid gold, inlaid with lapis lazuli and coloured glass, the eyes made of obsidian and quartz, the face serene and eternal. Chariots disassembled to fit through the doorway. Weapons, bows, arrows, swords, daggers, jewelry of extraordinary craftsmanship. Board games, senet, a game played throughout Egyptian history, food offerings for the afterlife, desiccated but recognizable, wine jars still sealed, clothes and sandals, cosmetics, furniture, statues of the king and of gods, shrines, ritual objects. The burial chamber contains nested coffins. A quartzite sarcophagus contains a gilded wooden coffin. Inside that, another gilded coffin. Inside that, a solid gold coffin weighing over 200 pounds. Inside that, the mummy of Tutankhamun, wrapped in linen, adorned with jewelry and amulets. Everything a king might need in the afterlife. The discovery creates a global sensation. Newspapers cover every detail of the excavation. Photographs appear on front pages worldwide. Tourists flock to Egypt. The Egyptian government, newly independent from British rule in 1922, asserts its claim to the treasures. After Carnarvon's death, leading to wild stories about a curse, though he died from an infected mosquito bite, all the treasures remain in Egypt. Tutankhamun tours the world in museum exhibitions. The 1972 exhibition Treasures of Tutankhamun travels to museums in Europe and North America. Millions stand in line for hours to see the golden mask and the treasures of the boy king. A new wave of Egyptomania sweeps the world. Why does it matter so much? Why does a minor pharaoh who died at 19 capture the world's imagination more than Ramesses the Great or Thutmose the Conqueror? Because of the time gap. Because 3,200 years separated Tutankhamun's death from Carter's discovery. Because everything in that tomb was placed there by human hands and then not touched for longer than most civilizations exist. Because it is a window directly into the past, unbroken, unmediated, immediate. When Carter opened that tomb, he found objects that Tutankhamun's own hands had touched, sandals worn by a teenager who lived when Moses might have lived, when the Trojan War might have happened, when writing was still relatively new and the world was young. The connection is visceral. The preservation is miraculous. And it raises the question that haunts everyone who studies Egypt. How did they do this? How did they create a civilization that lasted 3,000 years? How did they maintain cultural continuity across a span of time that saw the rise and fall of Sumer, Babylon, Assyria, the Hittites, Mycenaean Greece, classical Athens, the Persian Empire, and Alexander's conquests? The answer is not one thing. It is never one thing. It is geography. The Nile Valley is isolated enough to develop distinctively but connected enough to trade. The deserts protect the river feeds. The rhythm of flood and planting and harvest creates a stable agricultural base that can support a large non-farming population. It is ideology. The concept of Mark creates a conservative force that resists change. The divine status of the pharaoh creates a justification for centralized authority that makes sense to everyone involved. The elaborate funerary beliefs create a focus on permanence and preservation that permeates the entire culture. It is writing, hieroglyphic, hieratic, and eventually demotic scripts allow knowledge to be preserved and transmitted across generations. The scribal class maintains administrative continuity even when political unity fractures. Laws and precedents and accounting records survive regime changes. It is adaptability within tradition. Egypt changes constantly while appearing unchanging. The religion absorbs new gods. Amun rises from a local Theban deity to king of the gods. The bureaucracy adapts to new circumstances. Foreign technologies are adopted, the horse, the chariot, iron weapons, while being integrated into Egyptian cultural frameworks. When Egypt collapses, it reunifies. When Egypt is conquered, it absorbs the conquerors into Egyptian patterns. The Hyksos become pharaohs and adopt Egyptian customs. The Nubians become pharaohs and build pyramids. The Persians become pharaohs and make offerings to Egyptian gods. The Greeks become pharaohs and build temples in Egyptian style. Everyone who conquers Egypt becomes Egyptian to some degree because Egypt has a cultural gravity that bends foreign rulers to its patterns. To rule Egypt, you must become Egyptian. The alternative is constant rebellion and instability, but there is something else, something harder to define. Egypt endured because Egyptians believed Egypt would endure. The obsession with eternity was not just theology, it was a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you build to last forever, if you record everything in stone, if you mummify your dead so they will exist forever, if you orient your entire civilization toward permanence, then permanence becomes possible. The pyramids were built to last forever, and they have lasted 4,500 years so far. The temples were carved with the expectation that they would be read thousands of years later, and they are being read. The mummies were preserved in the belief that the deceased would need their bodies in a distant future, and some of those bodies still exist, their faces still recognizable, looking upon a world their owners could never have imagined. Egypt is a civilization that defeated time, not completely, not perfectly. The knowledge was lost, the language died, the religion disappeared. But the monuments remain, and the fascination remains, and the questions remain. What does it mean to build something that lasts? What does it cost? What do you have to believe about the universe to orient an entire civilization toward eternity? The Egyptians believed in Ma. They believed in cosmic order. They believed that the universe had a structure, and that structure was knowable, and that human beings could align themselves with it and participate in its permanence. They believed that death was not the end, that the soul continued, that the body could be preserved, that the afterlife was real and required preparation. Modern people do not believe these things, not in the same way, not with the same certainty. We know that bodies decay despite preservation efforts. We know that pyramids erode, slowly but inevitably. We know that nothing built by human hands lasts forever. The sun will eventually consume the earth. The universe tends toward entropy. All permanence is temporary on a long enough timescale. But we still visit the pyramids, we still excavate the tombs, we still translate the texts, we still marvel at the golden mask. We still stand in the temples and feel something we cannot quite name when we look at columns carved by people who have been dust for 3,000 years. We feel connection, we feel awe, we feel the presence of the past. Egypt endured because it was designed to endure. It endured because geography made it possible, and ideology made it necessary, and human ingenuity made it achievable. It endured through collapses and invasions and climate changes and technological revolutions. It endured longer than any comparable civilization before or since. And then it ended. As all things end, Cleopatra died, Rome annexed, the temples closed, the priests forgot, the language was lost. Egypt became a province, then a backwater, then a distant memory overlaid with medieval myths. But the stones remained. And when human beings relearned how to read those stones, Egypt lived again. Not as it was. That Egypt is gone forever, its people dust, its language dead, its gods forgotten by all but scholars and enthusiasts. But as a presence in human consciousness, as a standard against which we measure our own civilizations, as proof that human societies can create works that outlast their creators. When Carter looked through that hole in the wall and saw wonderful things, he was seeing the result of 3,000 years of accumulated effort toward one goal, defeating death. Tutankhamun's tomb failed at that goal in the literal sense. Tutankhamun is dead. His body is a desiccated mummy, fragile, broken by archaeologists trying to unwrap it. His soul, if it exists, is not eating the food offerings or wearing the sandals or playing the board games placed in the tomb for his use. But in another sense, the goal succeeded. Tutankhamun is alive, not biologically, but culturally, historically. His name is known worldwide, his image is recognizable. His treasures have been seen by hundreds of millions of people in museums and photographs and documentaries. He is immortal in the only way immortality is actually possible, through memory, through story, through the act of being remembered. This is what Egypt achieved, not literal eternity, but something close enough to matter. They built a civilization so durable, so distinctive, so committed to permanence that even after it ended, even after everything it believed was proven wrong, even after its gods died and its language was forgotten and its people were conquered and scattered, it still exists as an idea. Egypt is the civilization that refused to die. It died anyway because all civilizations die, but it died so slowly, so gradually, so incompletely that the question of whether it truly died at all remains open to interpretation. The Nile still flows north through the desert, green corridor in an arid land. The sun still rises over the pyramids, illuminating stone mountains built by kings who believed they would live forever. The temples still stand in the desert, columns reaching toward the sky, walls covered with hieroglyphs telling stories of gods and kings. Tourists still come from around the world to stand in the presence of these monuments. Scholars still excavate, still translate, still try to understand. New discoveries still happen. In 2015, thermal scanning revealed previously unknown voids in the Great Pyramid, chambers or passages that might exist behind known walls. The pyramid, explored and studied for over 1,000 years, still holds secrets. In 2023, new tombs were discovered in Saqqara, sealed for thousands of years, still containing mummies and artifacts. Egypt keeps yielding secrets. The past is not fully excavated. There is more to find. How long does a civilization have to endure to count as eternal? 3,000 years is not forever, but it is longer than the distance between us and the Roman Empire. It is longer than the distance between us and Christ. It is longer than the entire span of Western civilization from the fall of Rome to the present day. If we measure civilizations by their duration, Egypt wins. If we measure by their monuments, Egypt wins. If we measure by their influence on subsequent cultures, Egypt is foundational. If we measure by the questions they leave us with, Egypt is inexhaustible. The boy king lies in a museum now. His mummy is displayed in a climate-controlled case in the Valley of the Kings, returned to his tomb in 2007, visible to anyone who buys a ticket. His treasures tour the world, draw crowds, inspire awe. He has become exactly what he tried to become: immortal. Not through the magic spells in his Book of the Dead, not through the preservation of his body for his car to return to, not through the offerings placed in his tomb, but through the simple fact that human beings 3,000 years later opened his tomb and found wonderful things and told everyone about them and could not stop talking about them. This is the legacy of Egypt, not the specific beliefs, not the particular gods, not the details of mummification or the architectural techniques of pyramid building, but the audacity of the project, the commitment to permanence, the refusal to accept that death ends everything. Egypt said, "We will build in stone, we will write on stone, we will preserve our dead, we will create monuments that will outlast nations, we will achieve eternity or die trying." They died. The civilization ended. The knowledge was lost. The religion disappeared. But the monuments remain. The stones speak. The mummies endure. And 3,000 years after Cleopatra's death, we are still talking about Egypt, still studying Egypt, still trying to understand Egypt, still standing in the shadow of pyramids and feeling the weight of time and the pull of eternity in the presence of something that refuses to be forgotten. How does a civilization last 3,000 years? By believing it will, by building as if it will, by orienting every aspect of life and death and art and architecture and religion and politics toward the single, overwhelming goal of permanence, and by choosing the right river to build beside. That helps too. The Nile flows on, carrying silt from the highlands of Africa to the Mediterranean, just as it has for millions of years. The stones endure, resistant to time even as they slowly, imperceptibly erode. The dead sleep in their tombs, dreaming of an afterlife that never came, but somehow, impossibly, did. Not the afterlife they imagined, but an afterlife nonetheless. An afterlife of museums and textbooks and documentaries and tourists and scholars and children dressing up as mummies for Halloween, and students writing papers, and archaeologists uncovering new tombs, and the endless, endless fascination with the civilization that refused to die. They won. Not the way they thought they would, not the way they planned, but they won. Egypt is eternal, not literally, but close enough, close enough.